we're talking the impact of tariffs, we're talking about tech sector and AI, the growth narrative that currently is questioned. Have you been questioning it more this week?
We always question, obviously, especially since we have had 2 years of, straight up. So, but I think, a lot has happened, and there's certainly a fair amount of volatility in the market because of a lot of the headline risks that you just mentioned. But that said, we actually remain quite constructive still in terms of the backdrop of what's needed to build out for the future of AI. So yes, we did question, and we always do, but based on fundamental research, we're actually quite constructive on the outlook still.
Lei, let's talk about one of the things that was really hanging over a lot of the tech giants that have reported in recent weeks, and Nvidia as well. That was Deepseek. It caused a lot of concerns about whether we would need any of these chips, as many of them to begin with. How do you feel about that Deepseek concern after seeing Nvidia's report this week?
So when there are two parts to it. When we think about Deepseek, what we believe is that Deepseek actually, rather than just saying, oh, this is a model that requires a few $1 million, this is actually a step function and inflection point in the adoption of inferencing, which inherently is actually far more compute intensive than all previous models. Because what Deepseek is a reasoning model. In simple terms, you ask a question, it will take longer for an AI to answer, but it will give you a much better answer after they thought about it. So what we think is that with DeepSeek and with the OpenAI's O1 Pro that's out there, we are stepping into test time scaling, which is reasoning model, and both of those are inherently far more compute intensive, and the more the adoption of inferencing, the more the need for compute. So that's one. When we think about DeepSeek, rather than just reading the headline, we actually got more constructive because of inferencing. And then when we look at NVIDIA's results, we're not here to comment on individual stock, obviously, but what we are really seeing is that we're still at the very early stage of adopting rack scale compute, which is a huge system level compute. It's very hard to do. It will take time to do. And they're still in the ramping phase, but we are on track. So despite a lot of the headline noise, we remain constructive based on these two things.
One sort of fly in the ointment that I think Jensen Huang wasn't really able to satisfy the investor base on was ultimately China exposure, but more broadly, political implications to getting his technology out, even to allies. This is something Microsoft then went out and put out a note, Brad Smith writing to the Trump administration saying, please reverse the AI diffusion role. I got to speak with Andy Jassy from Amazon yesterday about it. Just have a listen to what he said.
I don't know how this administration feels about it, but I would say that we share the concern that it has limitations on certain countries who are natural allies of the U.S., who just to be able to do their business and those companies to be able to get done what they want to get done on top of these technology infrastructure platforms like AWS, they're going to need more chips. And so I think if we don't do it, we're going to basically give up that business.
AWS doesn't have a big knock from his perspective in terms of worrying about revenue, but more broadly, are you optimistic that we're going to get a more business-friendly federal government that's going to allow for easier exports, or does not that matter in your thesis for future growth?
Certainly, that's a consideration. And in fact, I think a lot of these political headlines is precisely the reason that you're seeing these gyrations in the marketplace. The volatility is high. But when we just look at the fundamental level, and if you look at these giants, the tech giants, and the amount of spending that they are actually doing in the U.S., and I would put China almost separately as their own ecosystem, that what they're trying to do, I do think despite the volatility we see in the market, there's actually ample demand, even when we just look at the U.S., what we need to do, and how constrained we still are on the supply side, in fact. So we actually think, yeah, headline aside, we still feel fine.
Let's talk about where that demand comes from as well in some of these AI applications. A big one is agents, and we heard from Salesforce earlier this week that it wasn't seeing the kind of demand it really wanted to see. I know you can't talk about specific stocks, but AI agents overall have been a big part of the narrative in terms of what's going to drive the AI rally forward. Are you concerned at all about that adoption really sticking over the next coming months?
I think when we think about a huge technology change and then innovation such as this, when it's transformational, perhaps it would take a little bit time for it to actually play out. But that said, things are constantly evolving. DeepSeek that just came out of nowhere, right? Took us by surprise. And that marked an inflection point, in our opinion, in inferencing. And aside from AI agents, I certainly think we're seeing adoption broadly. This is, in fact, one of the fastest adoption that we're seeing at the enterprise level. It will have huge disruptive impact at the enterprise IT infrastructure. And on top of that, what we are also looking at is the new form factor that will be coming out. A lot of companies are exploring automation and humanoid and the Internet of Things, and where AI will play a huge part of it. So if we actually, in fact, Deepseek, in our opinion, marked an inflection in adoption of inferencing, and we're going to see a lot more adoption going forward. This will be an important year from a lot of companies for us to see what's going to happen, but we are optimistic that we will see more than what's currently publicly known in the market.
I mean, look at the response of some of the Chinese giants to DeepSeek, and you have Alibaba committing so much money, Tencent coming out with its latest model over in China. But I want to bring it back here to the US just to finish this off, because we started this week questioning capacity when Microsoft had that TD Cowen note out and everyone's wondering about whether they're actually cutting some of their leases in data centers. More broadly, what gives you the confidence to say that capacity really is going to be built out here in the US?
We're early and we're capacity constrained. While a lot of the attention has been focused on, Microsoft potentially cutting, and we're not here to comment, we don't know. But that said, let's think about Stargate and let's think about CoreWeave. There are the names that, it's not everyday names that we're still talking about yet in the public arena, and those are companies that are still building out. So, and if we just focus on where we are in the build-out cycle, how constrained we are, and let's not forget that we are still at the very beginning of a product cycle that Nvidia is trying to roll out. Building out the entire data center with this massive scaled compute. We're so early, so we feel, despite all the headline, we feel pretty good actually. Volatility is part of the market, and I think with all the headline at the policy level, there's a healthy amount of fear in the market. So.